He said that we're not going to continue to just go out and get free agents every year and have $300 and $400 million payrolls. Other owners have seen the same thing going on in the industry, and that is if you're the Philadelphia Phillies or you're the Arizona Diamondbacks and you were the sixth seed over the last 2 years and you got to the World Series, what is the major difference between 85 and 95 or 100 wins if you have the equal chance in October to go to the World Series?
Setup Nation, what is up? I am excited to have yet another Chicago Cubs expert on the show today. We've had a number of recents that have been really fun conversations. Jordan Bastian with MLB.com. We had JD, Jim DeShays from Marquee, the color man for the Chicago Cubs. And now today, Bruce Levine. And great timing, too, because we've just come off of a signing with Hector Neris. So we got to talk a little bit about that. Talked, of course, have to talk about Cody Bellinger, and really an interesting conversation about prospects, not just Cubs prospects, but how they have impacted, well, really how the playoff platform that MLB has laid out in the last couple of years, how they've impacted how GMs and front offices have viewed prospects versus free agents, and why it might be causing such a slow offseason. So a really cool conversation. I'm really excited for you to hear it. Make sure before you listen, drop down with a comment while you're watching on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed, hit that notification bell so you know every time we're coming out with content. And if you're listening on the podcast, just leave a review. Can't tell you how much that helps us. So let's get to it right now with Bruce Levine. And make sure you follow him on Twitter too, by the way, MLB Bruce Levine, and give him some love. Let's get to it right now on the Setup Man podcast. All right, Bruce Levine, so excited to have you on the show. It was great meeting you at the winter meetings and seeing you again at CubsCon, but having you on here, I'm sure you probably can't believe it too. Over 30 years of working in Chicago. What's that feel like to look back on 30 years?
Well, it's actually over 40 now, and it's just a very lucky situation that I'm in to have been able to cover sports in Chicago for all these years and still be considered viable in some areas. If you stay off of X, some people still like my work.
A lot of people love your work. When I actually posted this on our YouTube channel and also on Twitter and all the places, that everyone was like, you got the GOAT, you got the guy. So we're excited to have you on, man.
Well, the one thing that I remain steadfast about, and that is whether I'm going up and down the elevator in my building, talking sports, Chicago sports with somebody, or on the Score, on Marquee, talking about the Cubs and the White Sox. I don't see any difference. We're all great Chicago fans. Chicago sports fans are the greatest in the world. I'm fortunate to have made a living the last 40 years talking sports in Chicago. And, I've just been lucky. I have friends who are doctors and lawyers. They'd say, other than the money they made, they would trade jobs with me in a minute.
That's awesome. You really are living the dream, and excited to have you on. And I honestly wasn't going to ask this question, but when I asked our audience on Twitter and all the other places, one question came up and you actually ended up responding. And I was like, that is the most interesting response I've seen so far about this slow offseason. So I am going to ask the question. I would love for you to share what you're hearing from other GMs, other personnel, right in the front offices, of why this has been such a slow offseason.
Well, first and foremost, the free agent class was a very weak one. There's probably 6 or 7 players that were really good. I don't consider any of the guys other than Ohtani and maybe Yamamoto remains to be seen that are superstar status.
Yeah.
So from a quality part of this free agent class compared to quantity wins by far. And people just weren't excited. There weren't that many guaranteed difference makers out there. And if you look at the signings, you're looking at guys left like Bellinger and guys left like Snell. These are accomplished guys. They're good players, but there's no guarantee that what they did last year they're going to do again next year. And I guess in sports there's never a guarantee, but the resume for both these very good players has been up and down. There hasn't been a linear movement to their careers, and that's why you still see them out there right now.
Well, you also mentioned the playoff spot, the additional playoff spot. That was intriguing to me. How do you think that that's played in with this slow offseason?
Well, ownership believes in the general managers they have and believe in their farm system, okay? They believe in the farm systems for two reasons. One, and in particular, the Chicago Cubs, who went in 2019 and 20 when Tom Ricketts talked to Theo Epstein, the then president of the team, about building a farm system. He said that we're not going to continue to just go out and get free agents every year and have $300 and $400 million payrolls. We have to build from within. And at that time, Epstein in 2020 stepped down because he knew that the farm system wasn't quite there yet, and it was going to be some losing to go forward. He wasn't ready to be part of that. So moving forward, other owners have seen the same thing going on in the industry, and that is if you're the Philadelphia Phillies or you're the Arizona Diamondbacks and you were the 6th seed over the last 2 years and you got to the World Series, what is the major difference between 85 and 95 or 100 wins if you have the equal chance in October to go to the World Series? Why should we overpay? Let's stick with our guys. Let's go with a plan that will augment what we have late in the year if we are a viable playoff team, and we'll approach it that way. Again, the Dodgers gone to the playoffs 11 years in a row, won 11 out of 12 divisions, won over 100 games 4 or 5 times, and they have one World Series victory to show for it. So with that in mind, I think that you've seen a slower offseason, and you may see even more slow off seasons, coming up, because people believe that it's about investing in their minor league systems and building up from there. And that's the way to build a winner. Now, let's not be naive about the fact that every good franchise, if they want to be consistently good, has to bring in player through trade or free agents to keep it going. The Cubs didn't win the World Series in 2016 only because of their farm system. They did it because they had good young players. They traded young players from their farm system, and then they plugged in viable free agents to help them win the World Series. Yeah.
Lester, Lackey, Hayward, a lot of those guys. When you talk about that strategy, though, just thinking about it from a fan's perspective, a lot of fans this offseason have been incredibly frustrated, not just Cubs fans, but a lot of fans have been so frustrated with this slow offseason. And now hearing that if GMs are wanting to really just dive into their minor league system, do you think that creates a lot less buzz amongst the fans? You look at the Dodgers, they got Ohtani and jack up the prices, and everyone's still going to go to those games because they're excited about Ohtani. Are they going to still be as excited about Michael Busch and like a big free agent signing?
Well, not just Cub fans, but all the fans of the 29 other teams that didn't get Ohtani had a letdown, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Even the ones that weren't even rumored to be in on it, the idea was, here's this great pitcher player who never existed since Babe Ruth was in the game over 100 years ago, and we didn't get him. Okay, so there was a natural letdown after Ohtani, right? Because everybody was watching Ohtani, then they were watching Yamamoto, and they were, after these two guys were off the board, it was like, what's left for our teams, and the answer was, we've already talked about it. It's not a great free agent class.
Yeah,
there are guys out there that are good, viable major leaguers, but are they 5, 6, 7, 8-year players? Do teams want to pay that much to gamble on that they're going to be as productive as they were in 2023?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, talking from a fan's perspective too, especially now that Tom Ricketts and the Ricketts family seem to be investing in other areas, news coming out that they're part of a group that's investing in the PGA. I think maybe some fans look at that and say, like, well, why aren't you just investing in our team? Why aren't you just focusing all your money on our team? What do you think about that?
Well, I look, I'm with the fans. I want the best possible product on the field for the Chicago teams every year. My job is to talk a little bit about the practicality of that and why things are happening and not happening. Okay. I'm not a decision maker. I'm just a guy that reports the news or the information that I have. And with that in mind, as a fan, when I step away from take my reporter's hat off and my sports talk show host hat off and sit back, I say the same thing, like we want to win this year. But the practicality of having a plan for more than 1 year is something that every business does, every big business. And, the Major League Baseball business is $12 billion industry a year and going up. There are plans made beyond just 1 year, unless you're Stephen Cohn for a year or you're an owner that just wants to spend and try to win.
Yeah.
That year, and even the Stephen Cohns of the world who went and spent every dollar he could and got a over $300 million payroll, and guys got hurt, and all of a sudden he backs up, and he's a different owner now than he was 2 years ago. So from the perspective of reality, as a fan, I want the teams to spend and win. If it doesn't work out, okay, I'm just a fan. I either go to the games or I don't. I certainly support the teams through listening on the radio, watching on television, buying MLB products, just like everybody else. But the reality is that, for Jed Hoyer to have a long-term plan, or for Chris Getz with the White Sox to have a long-term plan, that's part of what business is all about. Fans don't want to be concerned with that. They just want to know that in 2024, their team's going to win. The one nice area for fans over the last 10 or 12 years that wasn't really a big part of it in the past is they are tremendously educated about their teams and the minor league systems. Okay. Mm-hmm. They understand, how minor league players work, how they don't always all come up and help your team. Some of them are used in trades. Some of them just create perception. Right now, the Chicago Cubs have the perception of being the top 3 or 4 minor league systems with really good players. And other teams pay attention to that. Other teams want those players. And therefore, it creates a stronger position for the Chicago Cub front office to work from when they're in a situation like free agency, and that they don't have to bend over to accept any free agents that are pushed their way. They have other options. They have Pete Crow Armstrong. They have Michael Busch. They have young pitchers coming up like Horton and Brown that are going to be guys that are be in the rotation. They have other viable ways of competing, and I think for Cub fans, it's a little difficult to look at because they are not used to minor leaguers being a big part of this team. Yes, in 2014 and 15, you were getting the promotions of Bryant, you were getting the promotions of Schwarber, you were seeing the benefits of Javier Baez being a number 1 pick. You were seeing Wilson Contreras coming around in 2016. So you saw young players coming through their system that were great young players. But as far as the abundance of players, both pitchers and position players, this is the first time I think the Cubs have had pitchers coming through their system that were considered viable major leaguers since the time of Kerry Wood and Carlos Zambrano and Mark Pryor. It's been that long. It's been 20 years.
It's been a long time. I think that's a good transition right now to kind of talk about Cubs prospects. MLB Pipeline came out with their top 100 list. 7 Cubs players on that list. That's the first time the Cubs have had that many players on the top 100 list since 2014. They also had 6 in 2015 and 16. How do you compare this list and this, farm system that the Cubs have now, maybe back to that 2014 to 2016 stretch for the Cubs?
Well, I mean, in retrospect, you compare it favorably, but you don't necessarily. I mean, there was hardly anybody in the sport of baseball that didn't think that that Chris Bryant was going to be a superstar.
Right.
As it turned out, he was a superstar, but it's been more brief than it has been for the career that a lot of us projected him to have due to injury and whatever. He just hasn't quite been the same player the last 4 or 5 years. But the reality is that you had Anthony Rizzo, who they traded for and was developing into a star player. You had Bryant coming. You had Schwarber. Okay, you had position players that you could count on, and then Epstein and Hoyer plugged in the rest with free agents along the way. Spent a lot of money on free agent pitching. This time around, with the top young pitchers that they have in the organization that are coming along, I think they feel a lot better about it. You saw some of these guys in the bullpen. You saw certainly Steele be one of the top young pitchers in baseball last year. So you see pitching emerging in this group that really wasn't really there at all for that prior group that was based on position players making their way through as star players in the league.
So one of the things that I look at when I see this prospect list, right, is, you're not having the Bryants, the Russells, the Baezes that are in the top 10, but it also doesn't feel like, some of those guys that were on those lists from almost 10 years ago now were Billy McKinney and Dwayne Underwood Jr., right? And they didn't amount to much. I don't think I look at this list and say, hey, the basement feels, I guess, a little bit higher on this list when I look at this. And prospects are prospects until they actually do something. But, is that kind of how you maybe look at this too, that the basement is maybe a little bit higher, but the ceiling's maybe a little bit lower?
It could be. I mean, we don't know. Up until 14 at-bats in September, everybody was drooling over Pete Crow Armstrong, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was a can't-miss guy. And then he came up and, he showed tremendous ability in some areas and tremendous lack of experience in others when he played. Again, it was a brief period, but it shows you how fickle people are when it comes to these players. He comes up and he has, 14 batted bats, and all of a sudden, we don't want him to be the center fielder yet. We're not sure he's going to be good enough, right?
Yeah.
So if you said he wasn't up in September and that he was going to be vying for the center field job this spring, would you feel different about Pete Crow Armstrong right now than you do right now? I think that we live in such a society where it's about what you don't do rather than what you do. And there's been created some doubt there. Why did the Dodgers trade Michael Busch if he was the MVP of the Pacific Coast League last year? Why didn't they keep him? Did we get duped by trading one of our very best young pitchers in this deal down the road for a guy that might be another big swing and miss guy and maybe not what the Cubs are projecting him as, and that is the everyday first baseman who could hit 30 home runs and drive in 100 runs. Those are the things we're going to have to wait to see. We're going to have to wait to see if this works out or not. But getting back to your original question, I think there was more, belief in the Rizzos and the Bryants and the Schwarbers back in 14 and 15 than there might be in the Crow Armstrongs and the Bushes right now.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of buzz still around PCA. There's a ton of buzz around Horton, ton of buzz around Busch. When you look at a guy like Matt Mervis, who only got kind of the same treatment as what you're talking about with PCA, he got 99 plate appearances, and it's like everyone's forgot about him.
Right.
You think about Anthony Rizzo, the first year he came up, he was terrible, right? And I think people forget about that. So when I look at this roster, and I know that the front office has said, hey, Michael Busch, first base, but is there a world where Matt Mervis gets another shot and maybe Busch, just because of his defense, is slotted into DH, or because there is no answers at third base right now, gets slotted over to third?
Well, I mean, any of those things could happen, especially because we're not figuring in injury at this point. Okay.
Right.
So, I'm not wishing this on any player, but if Busch gets injured at first base, then the whole equation changes, right? So if is Bellinger on the team? Okay, yes. All right, who's our first baseman? It's Bellinger. Who's in center field? Oh, it's Armstrong. If Busch is on the team and Bellinger signs, is Armstrong at AAA to start the season? So there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know who the third baseman is. Is Morel the third baseman? Is there going to be any push to sign Chapman to a pillow contract, a 1-year deal, so that he becomes the Cody Bellinger for the Cubs this year, where he didn't see the marketplace being out there for him? He reestablishes himself, has a great year on a 1-year, $20 million deal with the Cubs, and they go to the playoffs with him. These are all still play and viable as we speak here on January 31st.
So since you mentioned Bellinger, let's just go ahead and ask the question. John Morosi earlier, I want to say this month, or it was end of December, said that the Cubs are the most likely landing spot for Bellinger. Yet he comes out I think it was a couple days ago, might have been yesterday, where he says there is no deal. The Cubs and Cody Bellinger are not close on a deal. What do you realistically think is the chances of him wearing a Cubs uniform again next year?
Well, I still think it's a practical. I think that Scott Boras, the agent, is looking for a longer term contract for Bellinger. And, at age 28, this is the optimum time for him to sign a 7 or 8 year deal. I don't think there's a 7 or 8 year deal out there. Okay. Yeah. I don't think the Cubs are interested in going that long. You hear 5 years, you hear 6 years, you hear him getting out after being able to opt out after 2 years on a contract. Again, these are all things that are probably in play, but the marketplace just hasn't been that robust for Bellinger. Certainly the Giants would be interested in a player like Bellinger. Certainly Toronto would be. There are other teams that could use a versatile defensive star at two different positions who's a left-handed bat with power. Again, this guy was terrific for the Cubs. In some ways, very underrated because he missed an entire month.
Yeah.
Okay, so you project his numbers, and he missed a month, and he still had the most RBIs, if you still believe in that statistic, of any player in baseball from the All-Star game on last year. He had 68 RBIs. I'm still a believer in runs and RBIs. Runs, that's how you win games. Runs batted in are guys that put the bat on the ball when people are on base and drive in people. I don't think you can ever get away from those numbers being important. And in this case, this guy was a really, really good player. Would I want to bet that he can do this 5 or 6 years in a row?
Yeah.
It's not my money. It's not my call. But that's what Jed Hoyer and Carter Hawkins in the Cubs front office has to figure out here, and whether or not they're willing to play chicken with one of the greatest agents in the history of the game, who is out there trying to drum up more business for his player.
I loved the way that Sho Tamanaga's contract was developed because it was 2 years guaranteed. If you perform well, it can turn into 4 years. And if you do even well during those years 3 and 4, then it becomes a 5-year deal. What do you think that Boris or Bellinger would go for something like that? Because I think that for a guy that's unknown, because he's been so up and down, that seems like a pretty friendly contract on both sides.
Bellinger will never have this is just my way I'm looking at this.
Okay.
According to his agent, he'll never have a more peak situation than he has right now. Okay.
Interesting.
Coming off of a terrific year, betting on himself by signing a 1-year deal with the Cubs, doing everything and more that anyone would have ever expected, coming back to the form that found him to be a Rookie of the Year and a National League MVP, having played on a World Championship team, a left-handed viable hitter with power, a guy that made adjustments to the point where the metrics people hated him because of the adjustments, because he took a 2-strike approach and started hitting balls softly to left field for base hits. Okay. Yeah. Metrics people hate it. Scouting people love it that he made an adjustment. He made adjustments and had the highest batting average of his career. He was still producing for the team, even though it wasn't hard contact that metrics people wanted all the time. So from what he did everything he could. And now he's 28 going on 29 to show that he's worth a long-term contract.
Okay.
People don't necessarily believe that it's going to be consistent because of the 2 previous years where he hit 165 and 210. Okay. They don't necessarily believe that he can't slump again. But from Boris's point of view, he's got a guy that should be getting $30 million a year for 7 or 8 years, and he's not hearing those numbers.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's where the frustration comes from as a fan, is like, if you're playing this game of chicken and 30 teams out there aren't willing to give you what you're looking for, at what point do you just look in the mirror and say, hey, I mean, maybe I do another pillow contract like what you're talking about and show that it is the real deal. And then when I'm 30, now ask for the 5 years or 6 years or more.
Well, there's an element of gambling away the ability to ever make $30 million a year when you look at it that way. I think, the practical agent that Boris has been is, hey, I don't care if my player signs in December or February. We have a number that we think he's worth. The marketplace indicates that's what he's worth. If you want to fill a role on your team with a left-handed power bat that can give you a Gold Glove at first or center or both, our guy is your guy. He's only looking for one person to agree with him. And for the most part in Boris's career, he's found that person. That's why he's been hugely successful of a $100 million industry called Boris Corporation. He's that good, and people are drawn to him. He's not the agent for everybody, but he certainly has proved that he gets the money for his top stars. Right now, in this marketplace, it appears there's a disconnect of what he believes the player is worth and what the teams are offering.
Okay. Bruce, let's pivot really quick. What do you think of the Neris signing?
I love the Neris signing because it shows great intelligence on the part of the Chicago Cubs front office. It's a power pitcher, a guy that's had more appearances than anybody over the last 3 years, averages 70 appearances. He's 35. Had a great year last year, although his strikeout to walk ratio was a little different. He walked more people than he had, but he gave up less hits. His ERA was really low. More importantly, the guy posts, 70 appearances. And the risk is $9 million with an option, so that if he doesn't make 60 appearances this year, the option doesn't kick in. The 60 appearances would pretty much guarantee you that he's pretty much like the pitcher he's been in the past in 2024, meaning a productive guy that goes out there and gives you a good outing. So I love it. I think the Cubs need at least a couple more guys for their bullpen. I don't think they'll be shy about spending for it if they can. There's still good arms out there. The one area that I think I've missed and other people that watch the Cubs miss is that the Cubs can make some of these things happen via trade.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They can make some viable trades here that really impact their team. They already did it with Busch, they hope. And they could do it again. Is Christopher Morel going to be a starting third baseman for the Cubs, starting DH? Or is he going to bring back a big pitcher or another position player for you that fits in more directly with what you're looking for with 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions surrounding trades right now. I think also not just Christopher Morel, but you look at now the bullpen situation. You got 13-ish guys competing for 8 spots. I mean, if you're looking to trade anyone, I think some of those guys, especially a young guy like Wisniewski out of the bullpen, that you're just not quite sure where he fits on the team at the moment. Who would be some guys that you think are kind of, if there is going to be a trade still coming from the Cubs, that they're the odd men out?
Well, Wisniewski and Assad, I think we don't hear enough talk about Assad. Okay.
Yeah.
He was a guy that helped them keep their act together at all going down the stretch in September. He was
good.
so valuable out of the bullpen. He was such an outstanding spot starter for them. I don't think you trade in Assad. Maybe a Wisniewski, but again, working on some different pitches even though he's not a huge power arm, he's a good pitcher. I think the Cubs have learned that pitching depth like Wisniewski and Assad are too valuable to trade unless you're getting more pitching back. So I would be surprised if they went in anything other than a deal that brought back more pitching.
Okay. With that being said, if it's not one of them, who do you think it would be? And again, this is completely speculation.
Well, I don't know. A lot of people like Brown. He hasn't thrown a pitch for the Cubs at the major league level yet. He was acquired, in a deal 2 years ago. Is he somebody that could go in a deal with some other young players and bring back what your needs are for this year and next? These are really good things. If you're a Cub fan, these are really good problems to have because other teams really do like your players and really would consider them an upgrade to some of the players they have in their organization. For home teams and their fan bases, it's hard sometimes to feel the value that other franchises, other general managers have of your players. And I think it's going to be a refreshing time for Cub fans to see, guys like Gleyber Torres or guys like Eloy Jimenez or guys like Dylan Cease getting traded, but you at the residual effect is that maybe you go to another 2 World Series and these young players who are in your system are star players somewhere else. It's the beauty of the game of baseball.
I love it. Bruce, has been a lot of fun, and we are going to end with a few questions from our fans. Again, guys, if you are not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, if you're not following us on Instagram and all of our socials, please do, because anytime we have a great guest like Bruce on, we're always going to give you a chance to ask some questions. So ready to answer a few fan questions, Bruce?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. Okay. The first one is from Milo. He posted this one on YouTube. He says, when do you expect the big 4 with Boris to sign? Is it going to be before spring training starts, after spring training starts? You see the Cubs grabbing one of those guys, of course, referring to Bellinger, Chapman, Montgomery, and Snell.
There's no predicting Scott Boras. Okay. He is going to get the best deal possible for his player. And contrary to opinion of, some people, he doesn't control these players. His job is to get the optimum amount in the right place where the player and his family want to go. They don't want to go. They're the ones that have the final say so. So from that perspective, there's no predicting. Remember, superstars, that he's had before have signed after spring training has started, okay? Yeah. I mean, Bryce Harper signed with Philadelphia after spring training started, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks into spring training. I want to say
right.
It was
worked out pretty good for Philadelphia.
Yeah, pretty well for sure. All right, next question, also from YouTube, from Matthew. Some projections have the Cubs winning 76 games. Do you agree with that? And does the potential addition of Bellinger actually make this team good enough to make the playoffs?
Yeah, I don't do I mean, David Haw and I do our projections the first week before the season starts that Saturday on the Score. I hate doing it because you can never project injuries. Okay, all you can do is look at depth. I would say last year I projected the Cubs would win 85 games. It was a call based on good health and some young players coming through it. Evidently, it did. They came close to that. I would say I would be comfortable again saying, 83 to 85 wins for the Cubs. And who's to say that doesn't allow them to go back to the playoffs at this point? That could happen. I think there's a tremendous amount of parity in Major League Baseball. And we've seen it the last 2 years with Arizona going to the World Series, Philadelphia going to the World Series, both of them only winning, 83, 85 games. So it's a real crapshoot. The 162 games doesn't give you much other than the fact that you need to get into the tournament at the end.
Yeah, especially when you've got a ton of rookies that are going to be making their debuts, plus Shota Imanaga. You have no idea what he's going to do. So there's a lot of parity for sure. Question from Michael on YouTube. Which prospect are you most excited to watch this year?
Well, now that Busch is there, it's going to be him. Originally it was Armstrong, but for me, it's Busch, and then Horton, coming in the middle of the year. Everybody in the Cub organization believes by July that he's going to be a viable part of the rotation. So I'm excited to watch him. I think anytime you have a pitcher that I don't think people think necessarily that he is the next coming of Kerry Wood or those guys, but they feel that he's going to be a top of the rotation pitcher. So I'm excited to see a Cub pitcher of that ilk come up. But I also want to see how Busch's career in the minor leagues plays at the major league level. I think that'll be fun to watch, whether or not that's going to be success over there at first base.
I love it. Last question on Twitter/X from Captain Tater Tot. Gotta love the name. Does Matt Chapman not fit in perfectly with the Cubs' plan of run prevention? They already have 3 Gold Glove winners from last year, plus PCA coming up.
Yeah, I mean, he does. I think at third base, it's an important position. I think because they have Gold Gloves at short and second, that they could get by a little bit without a Gold Glover at third base. The one worry you have about Chapman is that his power numbers were down last year. After 2 really great months, he really petered out offensively last year. I think he's a very good player. I don't know if he's the difference maker in the lineup that they want. When the season ended, I thought the most important thing for Cub offense was to bring back Bellinger or a left-handed bat like Bellinger, with not too many out there, and another run production bat. I just don't think that Ian Happ, who is a very good player, is best suited to be batting third in the lineup on a daily basis. He's a productive player higher up in the order, maybe even lower in the order. He's proved to be a good outfielder and a productive hitter, but he's not a number 3 hitter ideally on your team going into 2024.
Okay. I've got one final question for you. We've talked a lot about, there's holes potentially at third base, not quite sure what first base looks like, maybe not quite sure in center field, maybe another guy or 2 in the bullpen. What's the most likely next move, especially before spring training, that you see for the Cubs? Not necessarily who, just what position do you see Jed Hoyer needing to make a move on?
They need a middle of the order bat. Okay. Whether it's Bellinger or it's a trade, that they have to solidify. Look, I think they were 6th in baseball in runs scored, but if you take those 15 games where they scored in double digits out of there, it's not the same equation. Okay, it's not like they were putting up 5 or 6 runs a game, especially at the end of the year when their tongues were hanging out and they were not producing hardly any runs at all. So I believe that a viable middle of the order bat is essential for the Cubs. I know Scott Boras is depending on that being Bellinger or Chapman or a combination of both. Cubs have to be stealth and looking at the trade market and seeing what else really works for them out there.
Okay. Bruce Levine with 670 the score and a contributor with Marquee. We appreciate you jumping on here, being a part of the Setup Man channel. Here's to, some more moves and hopefully some excitement before spring training.
Kyle, my pleasure. Enjoy it. Keep up the great work, okay?
Thank you, Bruce. A middle of the order bat. What do you think about that, Setup Nation? Is that what you want the most? Would you rather have another starting pitcher? Would you rather have third base figured out? Would you rather have a couple more relievers? Drop in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. Let me know what you would like to see Jed Hoyer do. And as always, make sure that you are subscribed. Make sure you are turning on that notification bell so you know every single time we've got some new great content coming out about the Chicago Cubs. And again, big thanks to Bruce Levine. Super honored to have him on the show. I want to have him back on for sure, especially maybe in the middle of the season when we're talking about trade deadline and who the Cubs might be picking up because they're in a playoff race. How about that? All right, that's going to do it, Setup Nation. I'm going to go put my arm on ice. We'll see you next time.